Hey guys, this is Modern Refugee. How is everybody holding out today? We have got ourselves a pretty significant ice storm going on outside right now. Hey there, Library Lizard. Just punching in my stuff. We've been, actually, not we, me. I've been cleaning up from Christmas yesterday, and I was actually planning out going out today and maybe doing a little prepping, see if I could snag any Christmas deals, the Christmas food that has the Christmas stuff on the boxes. You can usually get that stuff pretty cheap to put up in the pantry for the next 6 months or so on that day after Christmas. But the weather is definitely not cooperating. Hey there, Be Spooky. Backdoor, Mikhail Kalashnikov. How are you doing? And of course, Library Lizard. Just glad to have you guys here. Like I said, I don't know if anybody's going to be on YouTube right now, but got a little time here, so I figured I'd chat with you guys. Had pretty serious conversations yesterday over Christmas, talking to some relatives that have moved from northern Michigan. Of course, they're younger. They moved from northern Michigan down to the Detroit metro area basically for work, and work is bad down there. They are in basically sales jobs because that's all they can find right now, and they're kind of making enough to get by, but their rent is $1,600 a month plus utilities. So what's that? That's over $2,000 a month. I'm an old guy. I don't even make $2,000 a month. I don't know how these kids are doing it these days. Hey there, Mini Ha. Zeke Anderson, my tour of duty guy there. Awesome. 1776. How are you? Fluffy 10 millimeter Jeep guy 92. Boy, that's a heck of a mouthful right there, man. Oh man. And I get all those references, even the 92. I was a crazy guy back in 92. Hey, Washburn. You guys getting the ice up there where you're at? Yeah, we've got, I'd say, a solid half-inch ice on everything. I went out, thawed all the vehicles up, took a little ride around the block because that's one of the things that I do, that I keep an eye on my neighborhood. If there's anything like a power outage, like a little bit of a storm, anything like that, I will go out and I will see once what my area is. If there's a power outage, I will typically swing down to the substation to see if it's local or if it's transmission coming in here, because we have kind of multiple power things here in the village where I live. We actually have generators for our village, but if the telephone poles are knocked down or the lines are down, that doesn't really do you any good anyway. So it's still good to have some backups. But as a general rule, if there's activity out at the substation, that means it's a transmission issue coming into our village here, which is a larger problem, so to speak. So then we kind of hunker ourselves down for a larger problem if that all makes sense to you. Yeah, freezing rain. It's been freezing rain since I got up. In fact, when I actually woke up, which was probably about 7:30, 8 o'clock today, it was still dark outside. I thought it was later than what it was because it was just so dark outside. And the kids didn't have to work today, so they're around. My wife did have to work, but I'm hoping she's going to be home here soon. And that was another thing. I went out to kind of check the roads to let people know what's going on. If you know anything about the Lower Peninsula of Michigan, the Zilwaukee Bridge had massive pileups on the bridge today. I follow a couple of guys out of Saginaw for local news, and the Zilwaukee Bridge was shut down. 675 through Saginaw was shut down. There were wrecks at I-75, Dixie Highway. These are all kind of like major intersections in the southern part of the Lower Peninsula of Michigan. That stuff is all pretty much shut down. YouTube added the 92 on you. Well, 92 was a good year. I got in a lot of trouble there in 92. Good times back then. Yeah. So thundering here in Millington and East. Yep. I know exactly where Millington is. Yeah, I imagine. And like I said, I haven't had any thunder here, but it's right. I've had a heck of a time just keeping the sidewalk and stuff cleaned off. But when there was A couple of things that always bothered my mother and my grandmother, and one of them was an ice storm, because they knew the ramifications of how much damage an ice storm could cause when the trees come down. It wasn't just you couldn't travel, it knocked the power out. And, they had animals and stuff. They had livestock, so they had to they had to feed the animals and whatnot that they had back on the farm. So when there was an ice storm, it was kind of a major issue. And, contrary to popular belief, wells can freeze. And, all the old timers um, they had the pumps outside. And those hand pumps outside that you see, at the old farms and stuff, those things could freeze. And then what they would have to do is they would have to heat up buckets of hot water on the wood stove, take them out there and dump them down in to thaw the well out so they could get, because a well, you can't, like, if you have pipes in the house that are prone for freezing, you can turn the water on a little bit so you got a trickle and keeps them from freezing. Pumps don't have that. Pumps, they're either working or they're not, and nobody's going to stand outside all night pumping the well to keep it going. But they would have to go out and thaw the well out, and that was, pardon the French, that was a son of a bitch to get those wells back open back up. Yeah, even the grass is slippery. Same here. Hey there, Captain Bart. We had a really good holiday. We actually got some very good got a couple of really good pictures with grandma. We and the baby, and a couple of years ago when my father-in-law passed away, that last Christmas that we spent with him, he was already kind of ill, and I was wondering if how many Christmases he had left, and I was right, and I was, Christmas was always a big thing for my father-in-law and my mother-in-law. They always did the big traditional Christmas, so when he passed away, that changed our Christmas routine quite a bit, but we're adapting to it the best we can. But, with the baby and the new life and stuff, that kind of had everybody's, even the grumpier members of the family, that had everybody had sort of their heart opened up this Christmas year. So it was a lot better Christmas than I expected it to be, actually. So that was very good. Hey there, Hudson Valley. Good to see you. Good to see you. 16 degrees up there in New York. That it's a little bit warmer here. It's like in the upper 20s. I think it was 26 on the thermometer here, Hudson Valley. But yeah, the ice storms were always something that the old timers, mom, dad, grandma, they were constantly upset about. Watching, having a margarita or a rum and coke on the beach for me there, Mosaic. That'd be the best thing you could do for me. I really don't miss that. Hope we don't get anything like that. Yeah, I hope you don't either there, Karen. Although I know the South does get nasty storms from time to time. But yeah, I really wasn't expecting this storm to be as bad as what it is. And like I said, it's still going on outside. But yeah, Christmas was actually really, really good. Oh yeah. Gold and silver is going absolutely crazy. Makes me wonder if I shouldn't sell what little bit of silver I got left and, profiteer off a little bit of that, but I'll probably hold on to it because I really don't need to. But that's why the old timers picked silver out of their pocket change and they dropped it into a bucket. Of course, nowadays you can't really find a lot of silver in pocket change anymore like you could. Like back in the early 1990s when I started running a cash register, you would get silver coins from time to time. And of course, I saved all them. But now they have all those automated, change counting machines and stuff, and they kick all that silver stuff out. Anything that's odd, wrong, wrong weight or whatever for it is, those machines kick it all out. So then basically the people that run those machines in banks and stores and stuff, they get a windfall there. But for the rest of us, stumbling across a Mercury dime in your pocket change ain't what it used to be, and it's because of that automation. Silver's at $77 per ounce. I thought I made out like a bandit when I sold some here a year ago when it was like 40 something an ounce. I just took in a little handful of um, silver eagles that I bought back in like 2012, 2014, something like that, and I got over $800 for them. I was to this day, I was just, of course, now it would have been even more what I would have gotten for it, but I still to this day can't believe how much that I snagged selling those few silver eagles there a year or so ago. All the coin shops are going to be crazy busy if anybody wants to sell any of that stuff. And we actually had multiple places around here back, gosh, probably about 15 years ago. So if you had any silver coinage or anything like that that you wanted to sell, there are many places where you could sell that around here. But now all those places have basically closed up. I know of two, maybe three places, but they're all in the city. But none of them are local here anymore where you could cash that stuff in. How you doing from Texas? I'm sure Texas is probably doing a lot better here than we are weather-wise, at least today. Yeah, you can't eat silver. A lot of people like it though, and who am I to judge? I don't really. Hey, you know what? You want to spend your money on silver and see if you can make some money on it. That's the American way about going about stuff. The old timers they did keep silver though. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. But they didn't do silver like we do it today. You know, there were some collectors. My dad was a coin collector, and I still have some of his coins here, but he had the more rare mint marks and dates, uh like a Liberty Walking a half dollar, like a night. I want to say it's a 1938 D. That is worth more because there was a lot less of a minted. I believe 1921 half dollars were very rare. There was some, I want to say there was some Mercury dimes in the 20s that were very rare. There was a lot of the Ben Franklin half dollars that they minted in the 50s. Those were pretty popular around here. But what the old timers would do, they would just go through their pocket change, and if they had a silver coin, they threw it in a bin, and they kept that, especially after 1964 when everything went clad. And most of the silver hoards that were around here back in the day, that's what they did. They didn't collect them; they just went through their pocket change and did the smart thing and saved all that stuff. And that was. A lot of different auctions and stuff and estate sales over the years that I've seen here where people had coinage that they did just that after those folks passed away. When did this start? I started at 1 o'clock there, prepping preacher. Mosaic says he's not selling, maybe $100. I'm really concerned with the stuff that I talked about with the family there, the ones that were looking for work and stuff. I did not like anything that I heard yesterday, over coffee and Coke and Coca-Colas, the old-fashioned Coca-Cola bottles, and had a couple glasses of wine after dinner and stuff last night, and anything that was on an economic discussion that we were having around the dinner table last night was all bad. So we're at least lucky here. We own our house. The other in-laws and stuff, they own houses and stuff. So, we got some places to fall back on if the kids can't make it. If the kids can't make it and economically and they got to move back home, at least our place, as small as it is, at least our place is paid for. It's a roof over their head. And to me, that was a thing when I was first married and stuff. I wanted to have a place where the family could basically retreat to if things got bad, because I had already seen bad economic times, when I was younger, and getting into the way things are now. I could definitely see that. And there's one regret that I have back, when we purchased this house back in, the 1990s. I wish I would have bought a bigger house. I wish I would have bought just a slightly bigger house because I never would have expected the different things that have happened in the last 30 years to take place the way they did. And but the one advantage to a small house is it's low. It doesn't take as much to heat this place. It doesn't take as much in property taxes to keep it going. Where the larger the place you get, I know people that pay thousands and have not pay, but have to put away thousands of dollars a month just to pay their property taxes at the end of the year. So they have to have a solid income always coming in, which is something we don't necessarily have to do here because our place is tiny. Oh. Hey there, Koylin. I got a lot of old bills too. I got a lot of old like silver certificates and stuff. Hey there, Miss Mary. 18 degrees up there in Albany. Uh, oh, definitely saving seeds is always a good thing to do. Um, certain things, if you're saving seeds, are biennials. Certain actually really good prepper crops to grow are biennial, so you have to leave them out and they have to overwinter and then they seed on the second year. The three main ones that I've saved seeds for multiple different times are carrots, parsnips, and cabbage. Carrots, parsnips, cabbage, along with potatoes, the apple tree, growing mom's heirloom beans and stuff here, and then having them for dry beans. Those are sort of my core um, prepper crops that I would grow, like carrots, parsnips, cabbage. They're all high in calories. Cabbage can be fermented and stored without any type of you can turn it into sauerkraut. You don't have to worry about canning it if there ever is anything. And you could actually live off of potatoes. And then, of course, apples. There's so many different things you can do with apples, from drying them to make applesauce, apple butter, all that other stuff. So those are kind of my core crops. But carrots, parsnips, and cabbage are biennial, and they flower and they blossom on the second year. And what cabbage will do is cabbage will split. If you leave a cabbage out, it'll split. And where that split is, if you mulch the heck out of that, throw a bunch of straw, leaves, whatever over top of that, cover that up with some plastic so the root doesn't freeze. What'll happen next spring when that starts coming around and it gets some water, it'll put up a shoot through that split, through that seed head, and then it will blossom. And then you will get the seeds off of that. And carrots and parsnips are actually quite easy too. You can just in the late in the fall, you leave some of your carrots, some of your parsnips in the ground. You cover them all up with mulch, cover them up with some plastic, leave them there. And in the spring, the same thing. When spring rolls around, they will send up seed heads and they will put up flowers. And then you can collect the seeds off the flowers when they mature. Typically, with parsnips and carrots, it's a big old flower. What you want to do is you want to take a paper bag, put that paper bag under over the flower. You want to tie that good and tight. Then you want to cut it, turn it upside down, hang it up. And then as that dries, it will actually drop the seeds down into the paper bag. And then that's how you sort your seeds for carrots and stuff. And the last time, about 3 years ago, the last time that I had an early variety of cabbage. Um, and I think I left two cabbage heads out over to Overwood Seed to see how much seed I got off of that. I'll bet you I got a good quarter pound of seed off of that. I mean, I still have seed here, and I still was doing seed starts from that cabbage the last couple of years that I had here. So that is something that just so you guys know that not all vegetable plants will give you seeds the first year. Stuff like melons and hard squash and corn and all that other stuff. And the big thing with corn is I've got good corn seed here, but I'm really afraid to plant it too often because there's so much agricultural corn here. It'll cross pollinate and it'll ruin my good heirloom. Because what I have here is just a native corn. It's a colored native corn, and I've grown it multiple times, and I've nixtamalled it and made tortillas and stuff like that out of it. But that would be something. If there wouldn't be any agricultural corn around here, I would plant a lot more of it. Library lizard squash root crops are definitely survival foods. Yes, that's very true because a lot of root crops are just high in calories. Good to see you, Stephen. Glad to have you here. Oh. Washbourne Billy, I'm terrible gardener except for tomatoes. Tomatoes, give you saving seeds with tomatoes and cucumbers. They have, when you cut a tomato, you got the little gel, the seeds are in those little gel. And what you do is you squeeze that tomato into a jar with a little bit of water, you stir it, and you let that get kind of funky and moldy on top. And what that'll do is that'll dissolve that seed coat. Then you put that in a strainer, you rinse it all off good. And then you take those seeds and you put those seeds on some paper towel to dry off good. And after about a day, you take them off that paper towel because you don't want them to sprout. And then you let them dry good and then you put them in an envelope. And Seeds should be stored in paper envelopes so no moisture can. I hate when I see people put seeds in anything plastic. You never want to put seed in anything plastic because those seeds, moisture has to get away from those seeds. And cucumbers, you do the exact same way. When the cucumber gets big and ugly looking and yellow, you do the same thing. You cut it, all them seed pouches will be in there in those little jelly pouches, and you ferment them off just exactly like you do tomatoes. Peppers, of course, are easy. Beans, of course, are easy. And potatoes, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll just keep some potatoes here, set them off to the side for what I have. And of course, they're going to get sprouted. And, by the time spring rolls around, you can rub the sprouts off them a couple of times so they don't burn all their energy up. But I planted potatoes that had sprouts on this long and, plant them a little bit deep, and they're still going to give you potatoes next year. So potatoes I don't worry about so much because I always have quite a bit of them here. And again, if there was some type of major event, I would plant a ton of potatoes. Mom's beans, potatoes. Of course, we got our apple tree here. We got a pear tree over at the neighbors, and the potatoes, the carrots, the parsnips, the cabbage, the beans. These are kind of my core survival crops basically, because you could get it ain't much of a meal if you have potatoes and sauerkraut, but you know what? If there's nothing else available, you ain't going to starve if you eat that stuff. And sweet potatoes, Mosaic's got in there. I grew sweet potatoes. I had actually really good luck with sweet potatoes 2 years ago. I put them in 5-gallon pails with really good rich compost, gave them plenty of water, and I kept them in the hottest part of my yard on the south east corner of my house. I kept kind of moving them around, so they were always. That's one thing about gardening in 5-gallon pails. You can keep them in the light. Sunlight is the biggest thing when it comes to vegetables. The more light you got, the better off you do. And what I did was I kept moving those a couple buckets around where I had those sweet potato vines in there, keeping them in the sunlight, keeping them in the warmest part of the yard. And I'll be darned if I didn't get out of them two 5-gallon pails. I probably got a good 10 pounds worth of sweet potatoes. And I was pretty impressed with that. I didn't think I was going to be able to do anything with sweet potatoes. And that's one thing when it comes to gardening. It takes time. It takes time to find out what works for you, what works for your ground, what works for your area. Gardening is something that you're not going to get it on the first try. You might have a little beginner's luck, but you know what? When you start growing stuff year after year, you really have to kind of be mindful because there's certain years stuff doesn't want to grow. You'll have a bad year, it'll be too cold or it'll be too wet, and you might get a different variety of seed that you weren't used to growing, and it's got its own little quirks, and it takes a couple seasons to figure that stuff out. So the quicker you can start gardening, the better off you are because you're going to have a learning curve in with that. Uh, hey, MR, merry day after Christmas. 3 weeks and 2 days, knee surgery, walking around. Awesome. Glad to hear you're doing good with it. I wish I had I had a lot of people ask me yesterday how my knee surgery went. And I said, well, if I had to do over again, I probably wouldn't have had it done because things are worse now than what they were. Uh, Yeah, Texans plant early. Yeah, I've got relatives in the Southwest, and February is their big. That's when they start planting stuff. Is in February, and that's crazy. But they have a lot of problems with heat, so they got to get their vegetables and everything grown. By the time May rolls around, it's almost too damn hot for stuff to grow where they're at. So they're straight up, straight up with the with the whole desert climate. But they plant stuff in February, and usually they have crops by May. And when it gets too hot, and then after that, they lay off of it again. So it's just a little bit different growing season in those climates. But yeah, peanuts. You can actually grow peanuts in Ohio. My mother grew peanuts a couple of times and she had marginal success. She did get them to grow a little bit, and she did roast them and stuff, and we did eat them as kids. It wasn't anything that was like a spectacular deal, and she only did it a couple of times, but it was viable. She did get peanuts to grow here. You're right. Texans got 2 seasons, hot and hotter than hell. Ain't that the truth? Yeah, knees take a while to heal. That's why I'm not getting too excited. I'm giving it a little bit of time to see once how things go. And this cold, damp weather isn't doing it. I can honestly say this is the first year that the cold has affected my limbs more than it ever has in the past. Gosh, what other things did mom? Strawberries were big. Mom grew a hell of a patch of strawberries. We had that for a long time when we were kids growing up. And the things with strawberries is not a bad cash crop. If you have a surplus of strawberries and you put a sign out at the road, say, hey, strawberries for sale, come in and pick your own, you will actually get quite a few people that will stop and do that. Mom did that with strawberries. She did that with eggs. Dad sold night crawlers. That was something. If I ever get the right weather and I get the right time, like in May or whatever, when we get a nice rain shower, I'll take you guys out and show you how to wrangle on night crawlers. Because Dad and Mom, when I was a little kid, that was one of the things Dad did for spare money. We went up to the cemetery in the middle of the night after a warm rain. We'd walk around with flashlights, and Dad would take a milk jugs and he'd cut a circle out of the milk jug, and you'd carry that milk jug in one hand, and you had a flashlight. And when you would see night crawlers, you grab them, slowly pull them up out of the ground, drop them in your milk jug, and we'd walk around the whole cemetery, and you'd have milk jugs full of night crawlers. And Dad had a couple of beds that he made, put compost and stuff in them, and he kept those night crawlers in those beds, and he would sell that to the fishermen coming up here who would do a lot of shore fishing. And my dad had probably 5 or 6 sets of customers that every time they came up, they'd say, we want 5 dozen or 6 dozen night crawlers. And Dad would always have them set aside for those guys. Those guys paid good money for those night crawlers that we caught as kids. And then, Mom, she would, hey, I got just baked some bread. You guys want to buy a loaf of bread too? They'd buy a loaf of bread or whatever else Mom had going on there. So, that kind of stuff, that's how you make a little bit of side money. That's how your side hustles. Now, of course, side hustles have a lot to do with the internet and being online and stuff. But I'll tell you what, those little kind of homey type skills and stuff. Mom and Dad made a little spending money on that when I was a kid growing up. Because Dad was disabled, Mom worked for a certain period of time, and of course we had the farm, so it was more subsistence than anything else. But my dad really couldn't do any work. They cut the top of his head off and took out a brain tumor. So at that back in that day and age and stuff, they didn't have a lot of as much technology as they do now. If they had to do brain surgery on you, they had there was no laparoscopic back in the 1970s. So, but that was stuff that Dad could always do. The other thing Dad always did was mowing lawns. That was another thing that he made good money on doing. He would go and he would mow lawns for people, and that was just life growing up. Hey, Scottish Prepper, how you doing? How's things across the pond today? Uh, good job. Most people don't know how to do it to pronounce my name. Yeah, I'm great with faces and terrible with names. Can't remember names. I remember getting coffee cans full of crawlers. Yeah, Dad would do a bed, and and then another thing with night crawlers, especially. Night crawlers are awesome for your garden. If you've got night crawlers in your garden, I mean, when I walk out of my garden in the spring and there's freaking robins yanking night crawlers out of my garden, I flip right out. I go out there and chase them robins away, because those night crawlers will make your soil 100 times better. They loosen the soil, they put organic matter back into the soil. Night crawlers are one of the best things that you can have in your garden. And then, of course, too, those night crawlers can be used for bait, and in a SHTF situation, you can catch quite a few fish with night crawlers. And another thing that we did going up north, for all those years fishing and camping and stuff, we would always trap minnows. We would trap, people won't give up their. This is thing that I seen multiple times through different recessions and stuff that we had. There are certain hobbies and things that people do that even if times are bad and money is tight, they still do. Fishing is one of those things. People will still fish if they got a string and they got a hook and they got a way, they got access to some place where they got some water where there could be some fish in, people are going to fish no matter how bad the economy is. And then, of course, if you're selling night crawlers a little bit to those people that don't know how to find them or dig them themselves, you can, put $5 in your pocket. Doesn't sound like much in this day and age anymore, but what's the going rate for a dozen night crawlers around here? It's between 3.50 and $4 a dozen anymore. Back then it was 50 cents a dozen, but it's definitely more expensive now to buy that stuff. But I seen it many, many times, even like in 2008, beginning of 2009, when it was at the height of that big recession there. People still fished, people still did their outdoor activities. Same shit, different day, mate. In the land of the woken entitled. Yeah, boy, I really wish Great Britain and Canada would really get rid of some of their archaic laws when it comes to protection and keeping firearms around. There is no reason why somebody in this day and age does not have the right to protect themselves. I don't understand that. I don't know. I'm not sure how I would survive without having some type of pew pew, because it's been so ingrained into me over the years. They were, it's now when you get into the firearms communities and stuff online, there's a lot of tech involved and all this other stuff. But when I was a kid growing up, a firearm was one of those core tools that you just needed. If you lived out in the country, it didn't matter whether it was a chainsaw or it was a shovel or it was a rototiller to work your garden or it was a small plow to, you know, pull behind your Ford 8N tractor, whatever. Those firearms fell right in with those. That was just part of the farm. You had to have that to run the farm. And they've stripped that away from people, kind of labeling that bad, and that's not bad. That's just life, the way a lot of us grew up. And to take that away and to rip that part of your existence away, I don't know where these politicians are coming up with this stuff. Yeah, we pick up crawlers after the raid at night too. Yeah, that was a big thing. Question: I am living in a rental house. It's 3 bedroom, 2 bath, a double garage, fireplace with insert, over 1,400 square feet, and the owners had offered to sell it to me, carry the contract. Well, I'm no financial advisor or anything there, Coilin, but we bought our house on a land contract. We bought a land contract. We rented it for 2 years, which was nice because then I knew everything that was wrong with the house. When that gave me a bargaining chip, I could, when I went to the landlord, said, I'm thinking about selling this house. And I said, yep, we're interested in maybe buying it. How much you want for it? He says, I want, 50,000 for it. And I said, well, there's this wrong with it, this wrong with it, this wrong with it. I'd like to fix all that stuff right from the get go. Can we maybe work on the price a little bit? And, my wife and we ended up purchasing this house. I think everything with the closing costs and everything, I think we paid $48,000 for this place. And that was back in the mid 1990s. And we bought it, and then we carried that land contract for 10 years. And then there was some other stuff that we wanted to fix on the house. We wanted to put some windows, some storm doors, some stuff like that on the house. And we had an amortized, which means they kind of tell you how much you're going to have on how much you're going to pay in interest and how much is principal for each payment. They had that amortized for 10 years. And my landlord, I'm thinking he thought that, maybe the interest rates would change and we would refinance in 10 years. And we kind of had that agreement that we were going to refinance in 10 years. Well, 10 years came along, the interest rates went down even more. So he knew he wasn't going to make a lot more with refinancing, and he wanted to refinance the property through us. But at that point in time, we decided it was best for us to do a fixed rate mortgage, which we did. And then we pulled the equity out that we had accrued over that 10-year period, and we used that for the home improvements that we did at that period of time. So that's kind of how we did the land contract. For us, the land contract worked out really well. We didn't have to have a massive down payment like what they were requiring or whatever at the time. We didn't have to jump through some of the hoops that the bank wanted. And then 10 years down the road, we already had equity in it. We had enough equity that we could take equity out. Plus, we were still over that 25% mark, what we had paid into it. And so it was no big deal for us to get into a traditional mortgage. So that's basically, kind of how we did it. And then, as time went on, we actually did pay our house off. So, we're in a pretty good shape there. But that is basically kind of how we did it there, Coy. Hopefully, like I said, and there's always, every state's got their own kind of set of rules and stuff, but um, it's always good to talk to somebody in that industry, somebody that's in, into real estate or into finance or something like that. If you got a personal friend that's into any of that stuff, ask them their take on it, because they're going to be in your area where you're at there, and they're going to have a much better idea what your market and stuff is. But that situation with us with a land contract actually worked really well. And land contracts can be beneficial to the landlord too, because if the person defaults on that, the land just reverts back to the landlord. So if you got a piece of land and you're selling it to somebody on a land contract, there's a pretty decent chance, if they, default or whatever, you'll get that land back, plus, the money that you were paid. And that's just how, kind of how business works here. Oh yeah, as far as restrictions go, but like handguns and stuff and semi-automatic rifles, that kind of stuff, Sky's Prepper, you guys really can't get any of that stuff. I know you guys still do some hunting and stuff over there on the islands, but did you like normally use like shotguns? Is it a I'm kind of curious what your own take is on that. My tax assessment is 29,700, almost 300,000. Owner said he would give me a good deal and he would carry the contract. Do you think it's a good idea and it's close to town? I can't tell you for sure. I can't tell you because I don't know your situation 100%, Coy, whether you think that's a good deal or not. But I would talk to some local people that you know and trust, and see what their take is on it. For us, it worked. Now, I don't know what he's offering or whatnot, but remember, you can deal with, you don't always have to deal with a bank. You can just deal with another person. But then the other thing I am going to highly recommend there, Coy Lynn, is once you got a land contract, kind of when he's got everything written out and whatever he wants and for down payment or payment, when you got all those kind of figures hammered out, that this is what the deal is going to be before you sign anything, you take that to your attorney and you have your attorney look over that, because if there's anything that's in that's picked out, anything that you're not familiar on, that's why you have that. I would never go into a land contract without having an attorney that I trusted, and we actually do have an attorney that we trust. I would have them look over all of that before I would sign anything. I would say, okay, I'll take a copy of your offer to my attorney. We'll look over everything and we'll get back with you. And I think that's just prudence in this day and age to protect, your side of the coin there. I hope that gives you my 2 cents there, Coy Lynn. And the thing of it is I know you'll get all the people that say, you want to have a mortgage because it's tax deductible and whatever, everything. I'm a firm believer that there should be a paid off home in the family. So if something happens and the family's got to consolidate, there's still a roof over somebody's head. And that's basically kind of how I look at that. Uh, Handguns are banned under 23-inch. Semi-autos restricted. Above 22, you can hold a bolt action. Well, it gives you a few options. Yeah, I suppose you got to keep them all locked up and stuff. Law is split. 2 sec on hand. Shotguns limited to 2 plus shell capacity. So basically double barrels. Still require the doctor report and have a cop visit your home for an interview. Yeah, that seems excessive. For at least from the way that I grew up, that seems excessive. But you know what? Maybe one day they'll change things. Hopefully, that's all we can all do is hope for. Yeah, definitely. Stephen Ross. Yeah, MR is right. Have some neutral look over the contract. That's what I would do. I would take that person's offer. If you think it's right for you, I would go. Discuss it with your local friends there that you trust, and then I would take it to an attorney, and I would have the attorney look over it. You know what? Sometimes $500 to an attorney can save you thousands down the road, and then but make sure every little thing is in writing so they don't. And I know people that had, I know one, this is one person that had a land contract on a residence that really got screwed. And unfortunately, it went like this. They purchased the home from a preacher, from a man of God, so to speak. And they were also very religious. And they said, we are all, children of God here, and we're going to treat each other decent, and everything's great. We don't need anything written down in paper. We're going to just do it word of mouth and a handshake, and God is looking over us, and it's going to make, we're going to do it like this. And those people paid that house off. And when the time came for the paperwork to change hands after they paid that house off, the other preacher, man of God, said, "No, no, we didn't have a land contract. You were just renting that property from me." Now they were screwed. They paid on that house for like 10 years. The house was paid for what they originally agreed for, but then the preacher came back and said after the fact that was just rent. We never had that agreement. And then he actually evicted those people and had his son move into that house. That's why you get a lawyer and you get everything in writing. Get everything in writing. You get it all written down, and you have somebody on your side, an attorney, look over to make sure that things like that don't happen. They trusted somebody that they thought was a religious, God fearing man, and he royally screwed them. So, you know, so you could take that for what it's worth. And that's why you can't really trust people when it comes into those type of agreements and stuff. You really need to have things in writing. uh, yeah, always have an attorney check it. And then, yeah, of course, I want to be able to pay it off before, and that's true too. There's always clauses like banks and stuff put in, about calling in the loan and stuff, and that is always. And when um I asked that when we refinanced our house from the land contract back to a traditional mortgage. I asked about calling in the loan, and I actually had there was a rider put into our mortgage where they couldn't do that. It was a locked. I had it contractually locked that we had to, that we did that they couldn't call the loan in under, duress type circumstances. And then of course we did what we could to pay the house off as quick as possible. And we all, hell, I worked for years making only $10, $11 an hour. So, raised three kids on it. So, we did everything that we could, financially to get the house paid off as soon as possible. Yeah, it's unfortunate, Scottish. I wish it didn't. I wish you guys really had ways to protect yourself, especially with all the problems and immigration and terrorism that's over there in Europe. Um, Europe really still has some issues with that stuff. Yeah, debt free really means freedom. This whole, it's okay to have a credit card to make, certain purchases and stuff like that, but having massive amounts of debt on your hard goods, I just want my home to be a refuge for people, in the family if something does happen. Even though it's small, we'll figure it out, as we go along, but having one paid for roof over everybody's head in the family, I think is an absolute must for anybody really, not just preppers, because you know what, circumstances change, things change, people, lose jobs, things go sideways, and you can sit here and come up with all the hypothetical situations that you want, but there's always something occasionally that can blindside you. uh, just got home from skating around on the ice. How you doing there, Uncle Bumble? It is definitely a nasty day out there. To find out what's here, there's a live to watch while I eat my lunch. Well, here's to you, brother. Steven, I think no matter what the local pew-pew laws are, it's good to have something in case of crisis attack. Yeah, yeah, and I guess I agree with that. You want to have a means to protect yourself. And yeah, in this day and age, it's getting worse and worse. And as see, the thing back during the Depression is people still had a bit of a moral compass. You know, people, destitute people. Even my grandmother did it. Men would knock on the door and they would say, "Hey, we're kind of traveling through looking for work. Is there anything that we can do for a meal?" Basically. And my grandmother, she would always have basically something there to cover those situations. And, she would make them a sandwich or a bowl of soup or whatever. And then they would say, can we do something for you? Can we at least, fill your wood box in or help you do the evening chores or whatever? And that was because my grandparents' farm was before Michigan built the main roads. My grandmother's and grandfather's farm was on basically a main road. So they had a lot of activity like that of men going through. And all the times that my grandmother told me that they um, provided a meal for somebody, never one time was there anything other than, respect and thanksgiving. I don't think you would see that nowadays. Now people demand this, demand that, oh, well, if we don't get our assistance, we're just going to go steal whatever we need out of the store. Just flat out, right out on social media where, that kind of stuff can be used against them in the past and stuff. People don't have that same moral compass now that they had back then, but not everybody, of course, but a majority of people did not grow up like that. So, if there would be a real crisis, whether it's economic or any number of problems that could go on, I think you're going to see people react both good and bad. I think you're going to see, some people react out of the kindness of their heart and be decent, even in bad situations. But then you're going to have a majority of the people that aren't going to look at it like that. And, that's just something as preppers that we're going to have to, deal with on a piecemeal basis when, things go bad, when things go sideways. And I think sort of the worse neighborhood that you're in now, the more of a chance where you're going to see stuff like that. Coney Bean, my Nana always had leek and potato soup, cheese, pickles, sardines ready for anyone that was hungry. Yeah, cheese and bread and like a pot of noodle soup was like a big thing because grandma and mom always made their own noodles. So that was something that, or, Spätzle's, homemade drop noodles and stuff, that kind of stuff was always there readily at hand, and then too, of course, they had what they had at the smokehouse, so and that was a thing. Even though they had stuff hanging in the smokehouse, I can never remember a time when my grandmother ever told me that they had anything stolen off of their farm. People would come and ask. Now, I've had people steal apples off my apple tree right here where we live, but that wasn't the case back in the day. People back then, they would ask, and most people would help others out like that. But things have changed so much. The plan is to pay it off in 5 years. That's awesome if you can do it. I wish we would have had ours paid off, and we probably between the land contract, I'll bet you we paid on ours 18 years until we had it paid off. But I tell you what, that was a great day when when my house was paid off. That was a great day. I was glad that that was behind me, and of course, even when it was paid off, I had to wait. I had to get my release of mortgage, and then I had to go back over to the courthouse, and I had to get my actual deed filled out that there was no, because you got to have your deed plus your release of mortgage to prove that your house is, completely paid off. It doesn't happen overnight. It takes, 30 days or 60 days to get all that stuff worked out. I had a heck of a time when I paid my truck off in cash. That was back in 2020. I got into it with the bank because the bank wouldn't sign off, even though I paid off on cash. The bank wouldn't sign off on the title of my pickup truck. They said, "Oh, well, we got a 45-day waiting period before we sign off on your title." So the truck was officially mine then, and that pissed me off this day. And I said, I will never ever get a vehicle financed through that institution ever again. Hopefully I never have to have a vehicle financed anyway, but I said I will never go back to that financial institution to have a vehicle finance because they didn't want to let go. That made me mad. Agree with you 100%. MR pop culture today is very little morals. Yeah, and that's something that I think we're going to all have to deal with on a case by case basis as things deteriorate. Because I don't see where things are. I can see us going straight into a authoritarianism is coming back. We've got the technological nanny state that's going to, be eavesdropping on every little thing that we do from now on out. The technology isn't going to go away. They're going to do everything they can to keep the technology rolling so they can keep their thumbs on everybody, and everybody is going to react. Everybody's going to react a little bit differently to that. But I really think we're heading close. I think we're closer to a 1984 world than I think most average people realize outside of the prepping community. I mean, the prepping community's got really, of any community out there, they have their finger on the pulse of what's going on in the world and all the kind of the negative connotations a lot more than I think average people. I have a good real estate agent. That would be your first person to talk to there, Coy Lin, on your situation, and then go from there. Yeah, Karen, if you ask, I will share. And I'm like that. I'm like that too. There's been lots of times where I've given stuff to neighbors and whatnot, and but if you come in stealing and then expect to get things after the fact, that's not going to work. Not for me anyway. But if you come up and ask, that you're having problems, well, I'll do what I can to try to help you out. But if you think you're going to come and steal in the middle of the night, that's not going to work, and that's not going to work for everybody involved. Yeah, and that's right, Stephen Ross. If things get tough, families will have to double up so someone can keep watch 24/7. I've actually talked to Selko a couple of different times, and we've had different conversations. Selko is the guy that survived the Civil War in Yugoslavia. He's done a lot of books and stuff and interviews and stuff in the prepping community. And Selko said when they were going through the civil war there in Yugoslavia, there was always, as a general rule, everybody fell back into a traditional role. So, the women kind of took care of the household, they took care of the cooking, they watched the children, and then the men went out. And two men would always stay back at the place where the women were at, where they stayed, and then the rest of the men, they would go out and they would do what they needed to do, forage, find resources, whatever. But there was always two able-bodied men at the home place keeping an eye on the women and the youngins that were at the home place. And that's how one of the reasons why they had a kind of a little bit larger family, and that's one of the reasons why they um, got through that Civil War like they did. And he's definitely said that was definitely a benefit to why they survived. They always had basically somebody on watch. Quaylin, yes, I'll have a real estate attorney. That's awesome. That's a great way to do it. And then get everything paid off. And then when you do have everything paid off, make sure that you have copies of all your deeds and all your pertinent paperwork, and you keep that in kind of a document go bag so that you have something, your insurance policies, all that stuff. So you have all that with you, that if you would have to evacuate or get away for one reason or another, you have all that documentation in place. So you can file insurance claims and whatever. It's good to have copies of all that stuff. I also believe in having marriage certificates. death certificates for land that has changed hands and stuff, I've actually had to go back. I actually had to have, um, when we had some legal stuff done, I actually had to have a death certificate to my grandmother who passed away over 20 years ago, for something right now because her name was still involved with a few things and I had to prove her passing. So, death certificates, birth certificates, social security cards, photocopies of IDs. If you have multiple IDs, multiple photocopies of that, and then keep all of that stuff in some kind of document go bag so that you could grab that in a quick situation. So you have all that stuff there. Yep, everything in writing. Yeah, no problem, Coylin. Like I said, hopefully I'm no advisor, but that's if you talk to the right professional people, they can definitely get you on the right path there. Copies and fireproof, yep, fireproof safe, and that's where I basically keep my documents with my firearms. So I have my my firearm safe. I keep everything kind of centralized there, and then two, you can take pictures of documents and you can keep them electronically as well. There's nothing wrong with that either. There's different things that I keep electronically on my phone, stuff, copies of documents that I use more often. I have a tendency to keep that stuff on my phone so I can go back and research some of that stuff too if I need some of that stuff. That's always helped out too. But it is definitely nasty outside. Kind of we'll peek here. Yeah, I don't see where it's letting up any. So I'm gonna make a ham tonight, and you know how it goes when you make a ham. That's good for at least 3 meals. So we're definitely going to be having ham and scalloped potatoes in a day or two, and probably ham soup as well, or not ham soup, bean soup with ham. That's what I meant to say. So that's all coming up as well, and I will be doing another live stream tomorrow night for my regular live stream as well, and we'll be putting together a couple of morning chats here too in the next week for you guys. But I want everybody to keep an eye on the economic outlook of things here for 2026. I can see where things are definitely slowing down, and I'm not quite sure there's going to be as much work available next summer as what there was here this summer. I think there's going to be some problems with that, and of course, the metals are all up, so everybody keep an eye on that, especially if you have metals in your kind of your prep plan and stuff. Keep an eye on all that stuff. Oh yeah, black eyed peas for what is it for New Year's? That's always the tradition that they do is the black eyed peas. Washburn Billy, is there supposedly a way to opt out of the digital ID? What do I know about that? I don't really know about that. I know you're supposed to have that ID if you want to travel, if you want to fly, you're supposed to have that whatever that other idea is. But I know some people who have flown without that and they're still all right. So I'm not sure how all that works because I don't travel that much, or I don't have really any um, inkling to travel overseas anytime soon. So I don't have a passport or anything like that. So you know uh, I don't know what they're going to do with that. Anything that they can do to keep their finger on, keep you kind of pressed down with the technological thumb, so to speak, they're going to do. And, I'm already in because I got a CPL here in Michigan. So, I have multiple government IDs basically. And there's still questions when it comes to things like purchasing firearms and traveling and stuff. Some people say you need this, you need that. And I'm on more lists than I would like to admit, but that's just the way it is in this day and age anymore. I do as much as I can without getting involved in that stuff, but if I have to have it, I do get it to a certain extent. Like I said, a CPL is a perfect example. I basically got a CPL. It makes it much easier if I want to purchase a firearm or if I'm carrying to protect myself. There's a lot less hassle. There's a lot less paperwork. The same thing with my wife. Even though my wife doesn't shoot as much as I do, I make sure she has one too, because if there's anything where she has to have a firearm with her, then there's no question. I think we have all our legal paperwork in order. That's kind of how I look at it. Take care, Karen. Merry Christmas to you and your crew. I'll skip the ham, but I'll be over for the scalloped potatoes and the soup. That sounds good. Yeah, there's always room for you there, Bumble. I don't know though. The couple people that I talked to that flew here just recently, they didn't really have a lot of problems getting in and out of security. But of course, I don't do that on a. I don't really do that at all. So I don't know from a experience standpoint where that all stands. Yep, Jody, stay safe. Yep, stay in. Don't go out and about. CPL Polly Givens is a concealed pistol license, and that is what they call that here in Michigan. It's a concealed weapons license, but it's only for a pistol. You can't have whatever knives and that kind of stuff. It's just strictly for a pistol, and they've tied it in Michigan here. They've tied it into purchasing firearms. So if you have a CPL, it's easier for you to purchase anything new than what it is if you don't, especially stuff like handguns, because handguns have a separate, here in Michigan, have a separate purchase technique that they go through. I don't know really the word to describe it, but you have to get basically permission from your local law enforcement if you don't have a CPL, if you want to go purchase a handgun. And it's always been like that. And there was a lot of legal running around that you had to do. You had to take the handgun back to the county seat, have the sheriff inspect it, then they'd issue your permit. But if you have a CPL, I call it, I'm buying my rights back from the government, because that's basically what it is. My right to own a firearm, I have to purchase a separate license to exercise my right, basically, is how it is. And I've done it. I've had, gosh, over 20 years already that I've had CPL, and it just makes it much, much more convenient. But of course, it's every 5 years, it's basically 130, at least the last time I think it was $130 what I had to pay. But like, again, it's basically buying your rights back from the government is what it is. Merry Christmas there. 15-minute city prepared. He's over there in Ontario. He's probably getting this ice storm too as well. But yeah, you have a Merry Christmas as well there, Polly Givens. My daughter and her husband received digital face scan when they arrived in the UK in September. Wow, that's crazy. Fluff, do you have to do a RI 060 for long guns now too for private sales? I don't know, because I haven't done a private sale in a long, long time. Anything that I've gotten from dealers, and I'm really not sure how that works with a private sale anymore. We still fill out the 4473, and if you have a CPL in Michigan, that expedites the process quite a bit. You still They still call it a background check on you, but if you have an active CPL, it usually goes right through. I've never been denied, delayed anything when I wanted to purchase anything from a dealer, whether it was a local a local gun shop or one of the bigger retailers like Cabela's, Bass Pro, anything like that. I've never had any issue. Although the bigger retailers like Cabela's, Bass Pro, that kind of stuff, they have kind of their own way that they go about doing it, and I'm sure they keep electronic records of that stuff, even though they're probably not supposed to. I'm sure that they do, because all that stuff is filled up. The last handgun that I purchased from Cabela's Bass Pro, I filled out everything on a laptop. I never even used a pen or a pencil, and I signed electronically on a screen, and that's all there was to it. I believe March 1st, 2024, that Michigan change requires a CPL to buy a hand pew pew. Yeah, that could very well be, because I've had a CPL for so long. Hey there, Glenn Arthur. How are things with you? Appreciate you stopping by. Ducky Poo, TSA clear does an eye scan in airports. If you're pre-check or regular TSA, you just show up with a boarding pass. Yeah, an RI 060 is separate from a 4473 as at the local PD. I'll have to ask the chief here. I'm good friends with the chief of police here in our village, and he's a good guy. I'm going to ask him about that the next time I see him, what the situation is for that anymore, because I don't know. We did, and I sold. I dealt with them 4473s and electronic logs and firearms recalls and all that other BS. I dealt with that for 30 years, and then of course, all the criminals and the illegal aliens trying to purchase firearms too. That was always that was always something. And there were some, I've had some circumstances with that that was crazy. There probably the craziest one was is a lady who had a restraining order against her ex-husband. If I believe it was ex-husband, I believe they were married. She had a restraining order against her ex-husband because of domestic violence. He basically kidnapped her and forced her to come into the store and buy him a firearm. And she kind of alerted the clerks at the time, and then they did what they needed to do, and they basically had him arrested out in the parking lot. Is basically how it worked, and that was one of the many, I guess, hairy situations that I had seen over the years of selling firearms. But there were different circumstances that were different variations of that. But that one was a real dicey one. But anyway, guys, been on here an hour, had a great conversation with you. Kind of back to the old school, having conversations. Digital visiting, I guess I should call this stuff from this point forward. But I really appreciate all you guys stopping by here and having a chat with me here today. If you're in Michigan or in southwestern Ontario, just stay hunkered down until this ice storm passes. So you guys are safe out there. I'm sure the roads are absolute crap back in the country. But I appreciate each and every one of you guys. I hope you guys always get some information, some entertainment out of my videos. I will be back tomorrow evening for my regular time, my regular Saturday evening live stream. I appreciate each and every one of you guys out there. You guys stay safe and take care. Have a good one.